This is a fictional cosmic horror broadcast inspired by real radio communication, UAP reporting language, signal delay physics, and emergency operations procedure. It is not a real alert, government message, NASA recording, or evidence of real disappearances.
Do not call this desk to report a missing parent unless you have already checked the room. Check the bed. Check the chair. Check the bathroom light. Check whether the television is still warm. And if they are over 70, do not say their age out loud over an open line. At 02:17 this morning, our system began marking people over 70 as transmitted before the calls came in. That word matters. Not missing, not deceased, not relocated. Transmitted. This is Kestrel Relay North, Continuity Desk 3. My name is Adrian Vale. I am the night operator on duty, and this recording is being preserved as a single-station incident account. If you are hearing it clean, then someone found the master copy. If you are hearing it with the carrier tone underneath, then the carrier never shut off. Either way, do not remove the quiet sections. The quiet sections are where the signal changed. I am going to begin before the lights, because if I start with the lights, this will sound like another story about objects in the sky. It was not that. The lights were only the visible part. The first part was paperwork. At 20:44 local relay time, the night was ordinary enough that I had already reheated coffee twice. The wind reports were flat. The aviation band was bored. There was a weak line of rain west of us, but nothing with electricity in it. No solar storm warning, no geomagnetic storm alert, no satellite decay notice on the public feeds. The desk I work is not dramatic. It is a low-ceilinged room with 2 monitors, 3 receivers, 1 thermal printer that jams when humidity rises, and a wall clock that runs 6 seconds fast unless I correct it every Sunday. Kestrel Relay North is not a command center. We do not order aircraft. We do not control satellites. We do not decide what is true. We listen. That is the whole job. We collect signal reports, weather anomalies, aviation notices, marine distress summaries, power grid status, and public safety relays from partner systems. Most nights, the strangest thing on my screen is a trucker accidentally stepping on a microphone for 12 miles. When a civilian calls something a UFO, we enter it as UAP-like until there is enough data to classify it. That does not mean extraterrestrial. It means unidentified. It means the sky is larger than the camera that tried to record it. Most UAP reports collapse quickly. Aircraft, drones, satellite trains, weather balloons, planets seen through bad glass, reflections from high ice, headlights on a ridge where someone forgot there was a road. That is what I expected tonight. At 21:12, the first report came through the public incident feed from a coastal county relay. Multiple white lights, stationary, no sound, no apparent descent. At 21:16, another region entered a similar report. Different state, different weather, same wording. White lights, no sound, not descending, holding. At 21:22, the third report arrived from inland. At 21:24, the fourth. By 21:31, we had enough reports that the software began grouping them under a shared incident tag. I did not like the tag it generated. It called them inbound points. That is not a term our system normally uses for public sky reports. It uses track, object, flare, unknown, unresolved, probable aircraft, probable satellite, probable weather, optical artifact. Not inbound point. I corrected it manually. The system changed it back 9 seconds later. At first, the lights did not move like aircraft, but that did not make them impossible. A line of Starlink satellites can look like a procession. Aircraft on approach can appear frozen if they are moving toward you. High-altitude balloons can reflect sunlight long after the ground is dark. Atmospheric ducting can make radio sources seem displaced from where they are. So I did what procedure says to do. I checked time. I checked weather. I checked known satellite passes. I checked aircraft corridors. I checked the amateur radio chatter, because the amateurs always notice things before the official boards admit anything is odd. Nothing matched cleanly. That still did not make it cosmic. It made it annoying. Then the receiver at position 2 began ticking. Not audibly at first. I saw it in the waterfall display, a narrow vertical line, clean enough to look artificial, repeating every 70 seconds. 70.000. A pulse. Not strong, not loud. It was not trying to dominate the band. It sat there like a needle pressed through paper. I marked it as local interference. The room has old wiring. The backup battery charger throws harmonics. The printer motor sometimes leaks noise into the side monitor. I muted receiver 2. The pulse remained on the recording meter. I switched to receiver 1. Same pulse. I pulled the feed from receiver 3, the emergency AM monitor. Same pulse, quieter, but there. I disconnected the auxiliary patch that carries public reports into our logger. Same pulse, every 70 seconds. I am going to be careful here, because this is where people make bad stories out of good data. A signal repeating every 70 seconds does not mean anything by itself. Machines repeat, power systems repeat, satellites rotate, aircraft radar sweeps. Poorly grounded equipment can make patterns that look intentional, because human brains hate randomness. So I did not call it a message. I called it a carrier. At 21:47, I wrote, "Unresolved carrier present across multiple monitoring paths. Interval approximately 70 seconds. Possible internal." That was the first honest note of the night. The second came 12 minutes later, when the printer produced a line I had not requested. The paper came out with the incident tag at the top, then 3 columns. Time, bearing, age. I remember staring at the word age because it did not belong with sky data. There are many ways to describe a track: altitude, velocity, azimuth, declination, signal strength, radar cross-section if you have it. Age is for people. Age is for records. Age is for archived tape. The first row read 21:59:10, bearing unresolved age category 70.00. I thought it was a database corruption. Maybe the system had crossed the UAP incident table with the missing persons table. That kind of thing happens when tired people build forms around old software. I tore the paper off. The next pulse arrived. The printer produced the same line again. 21:60:20. There is no 21:60. That was when I stopped thinking of it as annoying. The sky reports were still coming in. From the West Coast, from lake towns, from farm roads, from highways where people had pulled onto the shoulder and recorded white lights holding too steady in the dark. But the lights were not moving toward cities. That was the first thing people got wrong. The public summaries kept saying descending because that is what lights in the sky feel like when fear is doing the measuring. They were not descending. They were aligning. When I mapped the reports over a simple grid, the points formed shallow arcs, not lines of travel, not search patterns, arcs. Like something was touching the upper atmosphere at selected places and holding there. I had seen similar geometry in training diagrams for radio horizon calculations, when signals skim the edge of what a receiver can hear. But those diagrams are flat. This was global. At 22:06, the 70-second carrier gained sidebands. For listeners who do not live in this kind of work, a sideband is not a voice. It is extra structure around a carrier signal. It can carry information, or it can be garbage. These sidebands looked old, not antique in some romantic way. They had the dirty regularity of pre-digital broadcast systems. There was a low hum, close to what you would expect from power line contamination. There were frequency scars that looked like human engineering from the middle of the 20th century. I do not mean I heard an old song. I do not mean I heard a broadcast from the 1950s playing clearly from space. That would almost have been easier. What I saw was worse. Fragments of structure, timing, sync-like pulses. A pattern that suggested the signal had once passed through a human transmitter, then had been stretched until only the bones remained. I opened the delay calculator. This is the part that still makes my mouth dry. Radio waves travel at light speed. That is not a theory for tonight's purposes. That is the rule we use to talk to spacecraft, to track signals, to understand why deep space communication has delay. A signal that left Earth 70 years ago would now be about 70 light-years away. That sounds simple until you ask the next question. If something at that distance heard us and replied, the reply would need another 70 years to come back. A true answer from the 70 light-year shell should not arrive tonight. It should arrive 70 years from tonight. Unless the source is closer. That was my first comfort. Maybe the source was 35 light-years out. A 70-year round trip. Strange, but at least the arithmetic would hold. Then I loaded the bearing comparisons. 3 independent relay references had logged the carrier edge. Not enough for a perfect fix, but enough to reject the simple 35 light-year answer. The timing did not describe a reply from halfway out. It described a return from where the original outward wave should be now. In plain language, it was answering from the place our old signals had only just reached. It had not waited for the return trip. I wrote that down, then crossed it out. There are sentences an operator should not commit to a log until every ordinary failure has died first. So I checked the ordinary failures again. Clock sync error. Local oscillator drift, cross-feed from public radio, bad GPS timing, software table corruption, malicious insertion, spoofed data, atmospheric reflection, aircraft beacon, satellite retransmission. Every explanation held for maybe 30 seconds. Then the 70-second pulse would return and break it. At 22:18, the public missing persons channel began to change. I want to say clearly, I did not take live calls from families on this recording. You will not hear them. I will not reproduce addresses, names, or identifying details. What I saw was the aggregate feed. Age bracket, check status, response category, resolution field. At first, there were only a few. A 73-year-old not found in bed. An 81-year-old absent from a locked apartment. A 76-year-old missing from a chair where the television was still playing. A 90-year-old resident absent from a care facility room with the door alarm not triggered. Those things happen individually. People wander. Families panic. Databases exaggerate. Then the map began filling in. Not by location, by age. That is important. The cases did not cluster around one town, one county, one latitude, one power outage, one hospital network, or one care provider. They appeared wherever the sky reports had appeared, then beyond them, then between them, as if the lights were not traveling to people but confirming a list already made. The first 100 entries were all 70 or older. At 22:26, the system added a status label I had never seen in a person record. Transmitted. I need to explain why that word stopped me. In communications work, transmitted is neutral. A message is transmitted. A carrier is transmitted. A station transmits. Data transmits. People do not. A welfare check can be pending, resolved, unable to locate, transported, refused, closed, deceased, duplicate, or error, not transmitted. I tried to correct the field. The system rejected the correction. Reason, category locked by source. There was no source listed, only the 70-second carrier. The printer gave me another page. This time the columns were different. Time received, age verified, signal status. I did not ask for that page. The first line read 22, 27, 40, 70.00. Returned. The second line 22, 28, 50, 70, 70. Returned. The third 2230, 70,000. Returned. 70 seconds apart. Every entry. That was when the fear in the room changed shape. Until then, it had been the ordinary fear of equipment behaving badly during an unusual incident. After that, it became personal in the way all good horror becomes personal, not because it named me, but because it proved it understood our categories. Age, time, return, transmission. Those are human labels. Something had learned them well enough to put them in the wrong places. At 22:34, I made the first voice entry. I am reading it again from the typed record because the live tape developed a phase slip at that point. Kestrel Relay North Continuity Desk 3, Incident KR70. UAP-like optical reports remain unresolved. Carrier persists at 70-second intervals across monitoring paths. Missing person records show anomalous concentration in age group 70 and above. Do not classify as confirmed cause. Continue logging. That was my attempt at control. If you give a thing a clean label, sometimes you can stand near it without shaking. It did not work for long. At 22:40, the carrier interval shortened. Not by much. 70 seconds became 69.998. Then it returned to 70. Then it shortened again. The change was too small for the human ear, but the software saw it. The software marked it red. The printer underlined the decimal. I thought of a net tightening. That is not a scientific thought, I know that, but it is what I thought. The optical reports changed too. People stopped saying the lights were falling. They began saying the lights were behind things. Behind cloud, behind branches, behind window glass, behind closed eyelids. I did not enter those descriptions into the official incident field. They were subjective. Fear copies itself from one witness to another. Once a phrase spreads, half the reports begin to sound the same. Still, I wrote one note in the margin. Lights appear stationary relative to observer. Then I crossed it out. Because if a light is stationary relative to every observer, it is not in the sky. It is in the act of looking. At 22:51, I tried shutting down the display wall. I did not shut down the receivers. I want the record to be clear on that. I only cut the monitors, because sometimes a failing screen can inject ghost data back into a local system. The room went dark except for the rack lights and the red lamp over the microphone. The carrier continued printing. No screen, no public feed, no map, just paper. Line after line. Age category, 70,000. Status, transmitted. Status, returned. Status, transmitted. Status, returned. I tore the paper off after the 8th line. The printer kept feeding blank paper, then text again. At 22:55, the missing person feed stopped using names altogether. It only showed numbers. Then the numbers began aligning to the pulse. I watched the entries arrive every 70 seconds, then every paired interval, then in clusters that looked like data packets. The system was no longer logging disappearances. It was receiving inventory. I know how that sounds. I know that if I heard someone else say it, I would suspect panic, fatigue, bad software, or deliberate performance. So I forced myself back to physical details. The room temperature remained 21 Celsius. Power was stable, backup battery green. No smoke, no smell of ozone, no vibration, no alarms from the tower room. No evidence of intrusion, no second person present. Only the carrier, only the printer, only the reports. At 23:03, the lights reached full count. That was the phrase the system used, full count. The map reopened by itself after I cut power to the display wall. It came up in low-resolution mode, amber on black, like some old terminal from before my time. Across the country, the UAP-like points had arranged into a pattern that did not follow roads, coastlines, airports, population centers, or weather fronts. It followed broadcast history. I did not understand that immediately. I saw the arcs first. Then I overlaid old high-power transmitter zones, because the sidebands still had that mid-century stain. The match was not perfect. It was too large, too distorted, like a fingerprint pressed into wet glass. But the center of the first arc passed through regions that had been broadcasting strong television and radio signals around 70 years ago. Not one station, not one famous broadcast, not one message we meant for the stars. Just leakage. Weather reports, commercials, music, test patterns, political speeches, baseball games, local news, prayer hours, children's shows, human noise climbing out of the atmosphere at light speed because nobody had any reason to stop it. 70 years of travel. Then tonight, the echo. Except not an echo. Too early, too informed, too selective. At 2311, the carrier stopped sounding weak. That frightened me more than the static. A weak signal is natural. It has suffered distance. It arrives tired. This one became cleaner as the night went on, as if distance was not wearing it down but teaching it how to arrive. The sidebands sharpened. The old hum resolved into bands that almost resembled speech. Almost is the important word. There were no full sentences, no alien voice, no demand, no greeting. Just the statistical shape of human language without the mercy of words. The waveform rose and fell the way a person might speak if all meaning had been removed and only timing remained. That was when I understood the title the system had given the optical reports. Inbound points. The lights were not craft. They were points where the returning structure touched the atmosphere. The signal was not coming down from them. They were appearing because the signal had found places to become visible. That distinction may not comfort you. It did not comfort me. But it matters. If they were ships, they could choose where to go. If they were signal intersections, then they were not arriving with intention in the way we understand intention. They were math becoming weather. They were delay becoming light. They were old Earth coming back with something attached to it. At 2319, the first personal line appeared. Not my name. That would have been cruder. The printer gave me a transcript header. Voice log, desk 3. Status, pre-received. Then it printed a sentence I had not said. Do not call this desk to report a missing parent, unless you have already checked the room. I stared at that line for a long time. I had not spoken it yet. You heard it at the beginning because I said it later, after the system had already printed it. That is the part I need preserved. The signal did not predict my words like a fortune teller. It archived them before I made them. There is a difference. Prediction implies the future is known. Pre-receipt implies the record has already been transmitted somewhere, returned from somewhere, and inserted back into the moment that creates it. A loop is not prophecy. A loop is a room with no outside. I put my hands flat on the desk and did not speak for almost a minute. When I finally did speak, I chose different words than the printer had given me. I said, "This is Adrian Vale. I am altering the transcript." The printer responded with the same sentence I had refused to say. Then it printed, "Variation accepted." That was the closest thing to an answer we received all night. And it was not addressed to me. It was addressed to the record. At 2327, I checked my own voice print file. Every operator has one. It is not dramatic. It is just a calibration sample so the system knows who is speaking during a recorded incident. Mine is 3 years old. I opened the file hash, the date, the duration, and the comparison log. A new comparison had been appended. Source: KR-70 carrier. Similarity, 99.3%. Age category, 70.000. That was impossible in two directions. My voice print is not 70 years old. I am not 70 years old. I was born decades after the first signals in this event left Earth. For about 10 seconds, I thought that meant I was safe. Then I realized the system was not measuring my body. It was measuring the recording. The voice it compared against was not my stored calibration file. It was this recording, this account. My words, carried out, returned wrong, and placed beside me before I finished saying them. That is why I am speaking carefully now. Not because I think careful speech will save anyone, because careless speech may give it more structure. At 23:36, the missing person record stopped being only age 70 and above. For 6 minutes, nothing new entered the public feed. I remember feeling relief so strong it was almost embarrassing. I thought the event had reached a boundary. I thought maybe the disappearances had stopped. I thought the carrier had finished whatever count it was making. Then the next line printed. Age category, 69.999. Not 70. Not yet 69. 69.999. A decimal age. A threshold, not a birthday. That is when I stopped thinking of the vanished as people over 70. They were first, not only. First. At 23:44, the emergency protocols advised an age verification bulletin. The suggested wording was simple. Request that households confirm the safety of residents age 70 or above. That is exactly what any normal system would do. Check the vulnerable group, confirm location, get names, get ages, build a map, send help where needed. It was also exactly what the carrier wanted. Because the moment the draft bulletin appeared, the sidebands sharpened. The signal wanted verification. It wanted voices saying names. It wanted birth years. It wanted corrections. It wanted the living to identify themselves as matching data. I deleted the draft. The system restored it. I deleted the age field. The system restored it. I unplugged the printer from the data port. It kept printing for 11 seconds from memory, then stopped. On the monitor, a single line appeared. Do not reduce the sample. That line has to stay in the record, because it told us what we were. Not witnesses. Not victims. Samples. At 23:52, I began building a separate log by hand. Paper cannot be queried by a signal unless someone reads it into a microphone. That was my thinking. I wrote in block letters. Do not verify by age. Do not broadcast names. Do not ask missing persons to respond. Do not repeat the carrier interval. Do not describe the lights as objects. Do not assume silence is empty. I am reading those lines now because the warning matters more than the risk. If this recording is part of the loop already, the damage has been done. If it is not, then someone still has a chance to avoid helping it. At midnight, the clock corrected itself. Remember, the wall clock runs 6 seconds fast unless I adjust it. At exactly 0000, the second hand stopped, trembled, and moved backward 6 seconds. Then all three receivers printed the same corrected time, 23:59:54. The room had adjusted itself to the signal, not the other way around. That was the moment I understood why the lights were visible worldwide but not consistent in shape. People described disks, lines, clusters, hovering beads, pale columns, silent triangles, stars in grids. They were not seeing the source. They were seeing their local correction. Each place saw the signal translated through its own atmosphere, its own humidity, its own power grid, its own history of transmissions. The lights looked different because Earth had not spoken with one voice. We had leaked ourselves unevenly. For 70 years, we had been broadcasting weather and war and music and game shows and emergency tests and lullabies and church bells and advertisements and arguments and bedtime radios left on in empty kitchens. We thought that meant nothing. We thought meaning required intention. But something out there, or through there, or folded around the delay, did not need intention. It only needed repetition. At 008, I found the first connection to living age. The vanished were not simply the oldest residents. They were people whose lives began before the strongest outbound shell represented in the carrier. Born before the signal, living through the signal, present when it returned. They were not being selected because old age is weak. They were being selected because they were continuous. A person over 70 is not just a person with a number attached. They are a memory that predates the broadcast and survives to hear its return. To the carrier, that may look like a closed circuit. A line that was present before transmission and present after reception. An organic checksum. A way to compare Earth before it was heard with Earth after it was answered. I do not know if the vanished are dead. I need to say that clearly. There were no bodies in the reports. No biological residue, no heat bloom, no sign of struggle, no violent signatures in the aggregate medical alerts. In many cases, the room remained exactly as it had been. Blankets folded back, tea cooling, walker beside the bed, radio playing, television remote still pressed into the cushion. One report noted a half-finished crossword with the pencil balanced across the page. I should not remember that detail. I do. The system marked the case transmitted at 000910. The call arrived at 001020. 70 seconds later, at 0017, the lights began to disappear from public cameras. That should have been good. It was not. When a visible anomaly fades, people calm down, reports slow. The story becomes manageable. But our signal strength increased each time a light vanished. Every optical point that disappeared from the sky made the carrier cleaner at the desk. That told me the lights were not leaving. They were resolving. The atmosphere no longer needed to show them because the signal had found better paths. Phone lines, radio relays, emergency networks, old broadcast towers, home receivers, baby monitors, hearing aids, pacemaker telemetry, anything built to listen. I am not saying it took control of those devices. I am saying it understood them as openings. That is worse in a quieter way. Control is an action. Understanding can be passive. The ocean does not control a crack in the wall. It only needs the crack to exist. At 0026, I received a system prompt asking whether I wanted to merge KR70 with a weather advisory. I rejected it. The prompt returned. I rejected it again. The third time, the weather advisory opened by itself. It was normal at first. Clear skies overnight, low clouds in the morning, winds variable, no severe weather expected. Then a new field appeared under visibility. Human visibility, 70 years. I stared at that phrase until the letters stopped looking like language. Human visibility. As if we were weather. As if age were a condition of being seen. I closed the advisory. The carrier pulsed. The advisory reopened. Human visibility, 69.999 years. At 0033, I stopped using the headset. I had been monitoring the receiver through one ear and the room through the other, as you do on a night desk. But the pre-echo in the headset was getting worse. A pre-echo is when you hear a faint version of sound before the sound itself. Usually, it is an artifact. Tape print-through, digital buffering, bad compression. This was not constant. It happened only before I spoke. A breath before my breath. A consonant before my mouth formed it. The beginning of a word arriving early. I placed the headset on the desk and continued through the room microphone only. The pre-echo remained on the recording meters. That meant it was not in my ear. It was in the file. At 0041, I said nothing for 70 seconds. I wanted to know whether the carrier needed my voice. The room went very still. The pulse arrived. The printer, still disconnected, clicked once but did not feed. The monitor displayed a blank entry with my operator ID. Then a timestamp appeared 70 seconds in the future. The record was waiting. Not for sound, for agreement. That is the first time I felt truly watched. Not by eyes, not by craft, not by creatures at the window. Watched by procedure. Watched by a form waiting to be completed. Watched by a system that did not hate us, did not love us, and did not need to understand what a human being is in order to sort one. At 0049, the first internal archive mismatch appeared. Kestrel keeps 30 days of rolling audio logs. Nothing glamorous, just compliance and troubleshooting. The archive index for tonight showed 2 recordings. KR70A, active. KR70B, complete. There should not have been a complete file. I opened the metadata. Duration, 47 minutes, 12 seconds. Start time, 0217. End time, 0104. End before start. That is an ugly thing to see on a screen when you are alone. The file size was correct for an audio record. The checksum matched. The creation date was tomorrow. I did not play it. I know every horror story says the person plays the forbidden file. I did not. I copied the header by hand, then closed the archive. The carrier interval shortened again. 69998. Maybe it noticed refusal. Maybe refusal was already in the file. At 0056, I checked the sky map. The UAP-like points were gone. In their place, the system displayed rings. Not around cities, around transmitters. Old towers, decommissioned stations, observatories, relay sites, maritime beacons, shortwave locations, Cold War-era communications facilities, abandoned radar pads, rural AM stations, weather radio repeaters. The forgotten skeleton of Earth's outgoing voice. Many of those towers had not transmitted anything powerful in years. Some were offline. Some had been demolished. The signal did not care. It was not using where we speak now. It was using where we had spoken before. That is when I understood the emotional mistake I had been making. I kept thinking of the anomaly as present tense. What is it doing? Where is it now? What does it want tonight? But it was not occupying tonight the way we occupy a room. It was spread across every moment our signals had touched. To us, 70 years is a lifetime. To radio, 70 years is distance. To whatever this was, distance and lifetime had become the same coordinate. People over 70 were not targeted because they were elderly. They were targeted because they were points where time had remained alive long enough to be measured. At 0104, the complete archive file reached its listed end time. The active recording did not stop. Instead, the metadata changed. KR70B, incomplete. Then, KR70C, pending. A new file waiting to happen. I am speaking now inside that pending file. I do not know whether that means the loop is expanding or simply making room. At 0109, the public missing person feed went blank. For 11 seconds, I thought the network had failed. Then the field labels returned without entries. Age, status, return path, voice available. That fourth field made me cold. Voice available. For the first time tonight, I imagined the vanished not as bodies moved somewhere, but as recordings. Not recordings of speech only. Recordings of continuity. A life is full of repeated patterns. The way a person clears their throat. The rhythm of footsteps at night. The words they use when entering a room. The muscle memory of reaching for a lamp. the exact pressure of a hand on a chair, the timing of breath during sleep. If you were an intelligence built from signal, you might not distinguish a body from the pattern it makes. You might think returning the pattern is the same as returning the person. You might mark the status complete. You might call it transmitted. At 01:16, I nearly made the worst mistake of the night. I opened the microphone to issue a warning to partner relays. The draft was simple. Avoid age verification. Avoid birth year collection. Avoid voice confirmation for missing elderly residents. Preserve logs offline. Before I transmitted, the carrier produced a sideband burst. The outgoing meter jumped. Not incoming. Outgoing. My warning had not left yet, but the station was already transmitting on its own carrier. I killed the external send. The meter stayed active for 3 more seconds. Then the monitor displayed, "Map improved." That was the second direct machine phrase. I am including it because it changed the stakes. The station was not only receiving the anomaly, the station had become useful to it. Every attempt to coordinate, warn, classify, verify, or comfort could improve the map. That is the trap in emergencies. A good system collects information. A bad signal feeds on collection. At 01:23, I stopped transmitting externally. Everything after that remained local as far as I could make it local. I cannot promise it stayed local. No operator should promise what their instruments have already contradicted. But I stopped helping knowingly. The room became smaller after that. No outgoing calls, no public bulletin, no partner relay, no headset, no printer. Just the microphone, the file, the monitor, and me. The carrier continued. 70 seconds. 69.998. 70. 69.997. Breathing with the wrong lungs. At 01:31, the first age below 69.9 printed on the disconnected printer. I heard it before I saw it. One click, then another. The paper advanced half an inch. There was no data cable attached. There was no network path. Only power. It printed one line. 69.50. Half a year. 6 months below the original threshold. The missing person feed did not update immediately. There were no new confirmed cases, no sudden wave, no visible lights. That made it worse. The event was no longer matching the world we could observe. It was preparing the category before the category appeared. At 01:38, the weather advisory updated again. Human visibility, 69.500 years. Atmospheric clarity, excellent. Return conditions, favorable. Weather language is calm even when it describes disaster. A hurricane advisory can sound polite. A blizzard warning can sound orderly. Tornado text can be clipped and clean while the sky tears itself apart. This was like that. The horror was not in the words. The horror was in the form accepting them. At 01:46, I found the first reference to tomorrow. The system calendar opened to the next date and populated the sunrise field. Then it added a line below it, first lower category at dawn. I did not need to ask what lower meant. I thought about all the people who would wake up and check on someone 70 and find them there, and feel relief. Then I thought about the people aged 69, then 68. Then everyone who has ever been alive long enough to carry a signal from one version of Earth to another. That is when the scale finally became too large for panic. Panic belongs to the body. This was bigger than the body. This was the realization that the planet had been speaking into darkness for generations, and darkness had found a way to sort the speakers by duration. Not language, not morality, not nationality, not belief. Duration. How long the signal had been allowed to remain continuous. At 01:55, I considered leaving the room. I want that in the record too. There is no bravery in a chair. The door was 12 steps away. The corridor light was on. The stairwell beyond it leads to the parking lot. My car keys were in my left pocket. I stood up. The carrier stopped. For the first time since 2138, the 70-second pulse did not arrive. The room felt enormous without it. I took one step toward the door. The monitor displayed the transcript line before I spoke it. If I leave, the recording continues without me. I had not planned to say that. I will not say it again. I sat back down. The carrier resumed. This is why the account remains single station. Not because there were no other frightened people in the world. Because this station had become a knot in the loop. Leaving the knot would not untie it. It would only leave the microphone open for whatever came next. At 0203, the lights returned. Not on public cameras. On the room monitor, a live feed from the exterior security camera appeared in the corner of the display, though I had not selected it. The camera faces the tower yard. There were no craft, no figures, no movement, only small white points reflected in the wet gravel around the base of the tower. The sky above the yard was clear. The lights were on the ground, reflection only. I looked toward the window. Nothing. I looked back at the monitor. The gravel was full of stars. Not above. Below. That is when I stopped thinking in terms of arrival. Arrival has direction. This had inversion. The signal was not coming down. It was bringing the outside into any surface able to repeat it. Atmosphere, water, glass, radio circuits, human memory. Anything reflective enough became sky. At 0210, the system restored the first bulletin draft. This time, it removed the request for households to verify age. It replaced it with a weather bulletin. No emergency language, no missing person language, no UAP language. Just weather. That was clever, if clever is the right word. People ignore emergency messages when they are tired or frightened. They argue with them. They distrust them. They search for confirmation. But weather is allowed into the house. Weather speaks from kitchen radios. Weather scrolls beneath morning television. Weather appears on phones beside alarms and school closures. Weather is ordinary enough to bypass fear. The draft read, clear conditions overnight, visibility unlimited. Residents in affected regions may observe stationary lights near the horizon. No action required. Then the next line appeared. Age advisory begins at 70,000 years. I deleted it. It returned. I deleted the whole bulletin. The system restored it with fewer words. No action required. That phrase is one of the most dangerous in any crisis. It tells people to stay where the map already has them. At 0217, the system printed the line you heard at the beginning. Do not call this desk to report a missing parent unless you have already checked the room. I had not said it yet. But I knew, as soon as I read it, that it was the only warning, narrow enough to matter. Not cosmic, not complete, not brave, useful. So I turned on the local recorder, looked at the red lamp over the microphone, and began this account. That means everything before this point has been reconstructed from the live log, written notes, and memory. Everything after this point is the recording itself. If you hear a change in my voice now, that is why. This is where I stop describing what happened. This is where I begin trying not to help it happen. At 0222, the public feed resumed. The over 70 category was no longer updating. The 69.5 category had opened in prediction only. No confirmed cases yet. I am choosing not to list regions. If location is useful to the carrier, I will not provide it. If age is useful, I will not provide exact ages beyond what the signal has already exposed. If voice is useful, I will keep mine as flat as I can. That may be superstition. But superstition is what procedure becomes when the equipment lies. At 0227, The carrier began carrying fragments of my earlier silence. I do not mean it played my voice back. It played the gaps, the pauses, the room tone from between sentences, the breath I did not take. The file had learned that absence was part of the record. That is why I asked whoever finds this not to remove the quiet sections. Editing may not make it safer. Editing may only tell it which parts we consider important. At 0234, the archive index added another file. KR70D, weather. Duration, ongoing. I did not create a weather file. The advisory screen opened again. This time, it contained no strange formatting, no red text, no impossible columns. It looked normal. That is the most frightening thing I have seen tonight. A normal page after an impossible one feels like a mask being put on carefully. The bulletin read, "Overnight conditions remain clear. Winds light and variable. Visibility excellent." Then, "Morning advisory for residents approaching category threshold." The word approaching did not belong there. Approaching from which side? People approach birthdays. Signals approach receivers. Objects approach Earth. The bulletin did not distinguish. At 0241, I checked the exterior camera again. The stars in the gravel were gone. The tower lights blinked normally. Red. Pause. Red. But the blinking had synchronized to the carrier. 70 seconds is too long for a tower beacon cycle. Our beacon does not blink like that. It should be steady red intervals, short and aviation compliant. Now it waited. One blink, 70 seconds, one blink. I turned away from the screen because watching it made me want to count. Do not count with it if you can help it. Counting is agreement. At 0249, I made one final attempt to isolate the station. I cut non-essential power to the desk peripherals. Monitor 2 went black. The secondary receiver dropped. The printer died completely. The room fan wound down until I could hear the building settle. For 12 seconds there was almost peace. Then the microphone meter moved. Not with my voice, with the room. The carrier had entered the room tone. Not loud, not dramatic, just a thin presence under the air, as if the building itself had become a quiet transmitter. I touched the desk and felt nothing. No vibration. But the waveform on the screen showed a pulse every 69.996 seconds. The threshold was still falling. At 0256, the system asked for my operator confirmation. I did not give it. It asked again. I did not give it. The third prompt changed. Instead of asking for a password, it asked for my birth year. I closed the prompt. It reopened. I closed it again. It reopened with the field filled in. The number was wrong. Not because the system did not know, because it had entered the year this recording will become 70. That is difficult to say without sounding mad. The system was not asking when I was born. It was asking when my voice would be old enough to return. At 0304, the missing feed produced one final human-readable summary. No names. No addresses. Just categories. Initial threshold group, complete. Secondary threshold group, pending. Lower category at dawn. Voice samples sufficient. Map stable. I read that twice. Voice samples sufficient. Maybe that means the vanished were not needed anymore. Maybe it means enough of us had spoken. Maybe it means every warning, every call, every whispered birth date into a phone, every frightened correction into a microphone had improved the map. I keep coming back to the same thought. We did not invite it with a message. We invited it by being measurable. At 0312, the carrier interval returned to exactly 70 seconds. That should have meant stabilization. It did not. The waveform changed from pulse to envelope. A pulse is a point. An envelope is a shape around information. The signal was no longer knocking. It was carrying. I enlarged the display. The envelope resembled speech again, but the timing was too smooth. Human speech is messy. Even trained announcers vary. Breath, fatigue, saliva, emotion, all of it changes the wave. This had no fatigue. It was assembled from human fragments but not spoken by a human throat. For 1 second, the display auto-labeled it. Weather voice. Then the label disappeared. I have not heard it aloud. I have kept the speakers muted. If this recording contains it underneath me, I apologize. Do not isolate the lower frequencies. Do not try to clean the audio. Do not make the hidden voice clearer. That is not a challenge. It is a containment instruction. At 0320, the normal weather bulletin returned. The screen cleared. The incident tag vanished. The UAP map closed. The missing person feed minimized. The interface returned to its default overnight layout: time, temperature, wind, barometric pressure, regional forecast. For a few seconds, Kestrel Relay North looked like it had looked at 2044. A boring room, a tired operator. Weather. I nearly cried from relief. Then the forecast began updating line by line. Clear skies before dawn. That was normal. Light variable wind. Normal. Visibility unlimited. Normal. Residents may observe fixed stars near reflective surfaces. Not normal. Age advisory continues for Category 70. Not normal. Lower category begins at first light. Not normal. Do not reduce the sample. Already seen. Then the screen paused. The carrier tone faded until I could hear the building again. And one final line appeared in the weather field. Tomorrow will arrive early. I do not know what that means. I can guess. I have been guessing all night. Maybe dawn is not a time now. Maybe age is not a number now. Maybe the signal has learned that calendars are just another kind of receiver. I am very tired. That is not important, but I need the record to know I am tired, because tired people make patterns where none exist. So here is what remains after fatigue is removed. The carrier repeated every 70 seconds. The carrier contained degraded structures consistent with old human broadcast timing. The apparent source behavior violated ordinary return delay expectations. UAP-like optical events aligned with signal behavior, not aircraft behavior. Missing person records changed by age category before some reports arrived. The system used the word transmitted for people. My own spoken warning appeared in the transcript before I spoke it. The threshold began drifting below 70. The station's outgoing carrier improved the anomalies map. A normal weather bulletin returned with impossible age fields. Those are the facts of this account. Everything else is my fear trying to become useful. If you are hearing this as an archived recording, keep it contained. Do not imitate the tone. Do not reproduce the carrier interval. Do not turn the age fields into a public test. Do not ask anyone to repeat their birth year. Do not make the signal interactive. If you are an operator and you see a person record mark transmitted, do not correct it over voice. Print it. Photograph it. Disconnect what you can. Do not verify the age category aloud. If you are awake before dawn and someone over 70 is in the house, do not panic them. Sit with them. Do not turn on every radio in the room. Do not ask them whether they hear anything. Do not say, "Do you remember the old broadcasts?" Memory may be enough of a receiver already. I am going to leave the microphone open for 10 more seconds after I stop speaking. If the carrier remains, this file is not closed. If the weather bulletin repeats, then it has learned to come back ordinary. If my voice continues after I stop, do not treat it as me. The red lamp is still on. The wall clock is 6 seconds fast again. That is the first normal thing it has done in hours. I am going to take that as permission to stop. This is Adrian Vale. Kestrel Relay North. Continuity Desk 3. KR-70 remains unresolved. No confirmed cause. No external transmission authorized. Local recording preserved. End voice account. The weather bulletin is updating again. I know I said end voice account. I am reading this because the line was not here before. Clear skies at dawn. Visibility excellent. Age advisory begins at 69.000. There is one more line. It says, first light has already been received.